Theology is participation, Trinitarian narrative, and missional praxis. The task of theology is often viewed as separate and unrelated to real life, to where life really happens. A number of theologians, however, have attempted to reverse this view of theology. In his courses on theology, Miroslav Volf remarks that he expects the often asked question from students, but what does that have to do with real life? In response to this, Volf contends that at the heart of every good theology lies not simply a plausible intellectual vision, but more importantly, a compelling account of a way of life, and that theology is therefore best done within the pursuit of this way of life. Similarly, Ray Anderson observes that the divide between academic theology and practical theology has been too wide, and that this has contributed to the perceived irrelevance of theology. According to Anderson, academic theology has often been termed academic in the same sense as playing a baseball game which has no ultimate impact in the outcome of the game. Anderson questions the resulting divide between theory and practice, and rightly so. Likewise, Stanley Grenz long asserted that theology is indeed practical and interwoven into Christian life and practice. My aim is to explicate a theology of participation that is not only practical, but expressed in a way of life that is characterized by Trinitarian narrative and missional praxis. The Apostle Paul said that it is in God that we live and move and have our being. Everything that has been made finds its ultimate ground in God, having been created for God's own glory, and this is no less true for humans. Each individual life, our very existence, occurs in the context of the reality of God. Besides being the ultimate ground of existence or being, the triune nature of God is also the ground of the theological task. Theology, both as a discipline and as a way of life, should be shaped by the reality of the triune God from which it springs. T.F. Torrance speaks of the Trinity as the ultimate ground of theological knowledge of God and as the basic grammar of theology. God forms the beginning, middle, and end of theology because all theology starts with God, all theology is ultimately about God, and all theology finds its completion in God. Stanley Grenz proposes 4 statements which helpfully summarize basic Trinitarian thought. The first is that God is one. God alone is the one true God, and God is of one divine essence and of only one divine essence. The second statement is that God is three. The one God is 3 persons, the Father, Son, and Spirit, who are co-equal, co-eternal, and coexistence, for they share in the one divine essence. Though a part of God's self-revelation, the divine threeness is not simply the way God appears to people. The oneness and threeness of God comprise an ontological reality. The third statement is that God is a diversity. As diversity within unity, the divine persons are eternally differentiated both ontologically, as Father, Son, and Spirit, as well as in the divine economy, as each carries out a different task in pursuit of the one divine program, or what Kevin Van Hooser calls the theodrama. The fourth statement is that God is a unity. Though each fulfills a different function, the triune persons are mutually dependent on each other, and all are involved in each area of God's activity in the world. The triune God exists in plurality within oneness, a unity, the one God, within diversity, the plurality of the 3 persons, and also in community in the Trinity. God's nature cannot be understood until one accepts that God is not simply an individual. Father, Son, and Spirit build an eternal ontological plurality, a unity in diversity and community. The 3 members of the Trinity are eternally bound by one purpose and mission in the theodrama, which can be referred to as the divine program or the oikonomia of God. In this, the 3 divine persons, who are the dramatis personae of the theodrama, comprise the economic Trinity as they are active together in the redemptive activity and history of God. Though each fulfills a different task, they do not do so to the exclusion of the others, for they are each dependent on the others. The work of one is the work of all, and the mission of one is the mission of all. Thus, in the economic Trinity, one finds the shared purpose and missional praxis of God, a participation of Father, Son, and Spirit with each other. The Father, Son, and Spirit also share one divine life, experiencing a common life together of give and take, partnership, and mutual interdependence, which can be referred to as the immanent Trinity. Perichoresis is sometimes used to describe the communal relations that exist within the Trinity. Perichoresis carries with it the idea of mutual mutual indwelling, as well as a dynamic and reciprocal interpenetration among Father, Son, and Spirit, a participation of the divine persons in each other. The thrust is that Father, Son, and Spirit relate to each other without losing identity, but at the same time, the common life and participation among them is so strong that there cannot be a Father, Son, or Spirit without each of the others. Thus, at the heart of the Trinity is not only missional praxis and purpose, but also shared life, community, and the participation of Father, Son, and Spirit in and with each other. The persistent temptation is for theologians to focus on the economic or the immanent Trinity to the exclusion of the other. However, the two are simply different ways of speaking of the same triune God and are bound up in each other. The economic Trinity may be said to have epistemological priority in that it is the way persons come to know God through God's self-revelation. However, the immanent Trinity may be said to possess ontological primacy in that the economic activity of God in the world is grounded in and proceeds forth from the divine perichoresis. There are therefore two primary trine movements that are bound up in each other. The first is the inner perichoretic movement of relations among the Father, Son, and Spirit by which they participate in each other. The second is an outward movement of missional love and community whereby the inner perichoretic dance becomes a missional dance in the grand triune theodrama by which Father, Son, and Spirit participate with each other. Thus, God's missional praxis cannot be separated from the eternal and internal communion and participation of the divine persons with and in each other. Paul Fittis has argued for participation in God, and in the process has critiqued many advocates of the social view of the Trinity as persons in relation for only proposing an imitation of the social Trinity versus a participation in the Trinity. Fittis does not wish to do away with an imitation of the Trinity, but feels that a social Trinitarianism only allows for modeling or observing and drawing parallels with the Trinity. Fittis declares it is not enough to plead God is united and yet lives in relations, so we should be like this too. Fittis proposes that we speak of the Trinity as persons as relations and aims to complement our imitation of God with participation in God. Fittis claims that identifying the divine persons as relations provides a way to hold being or ontology and knowing or epistemology together. The being of the divine persons as relations can only be known through an epistemology of participation. Each only makes sense in the context of the other, says Fittis. Grins, though, is noted for his strong advocacy of the social Trinity, whom he describes as the eternal community of Father, Son, and Spirit. Grins is also well known for proposing a Trinitarian view of the Imago Dei, in which persons mirror and reflect the communal relations of the divine persons in relationship to other people. Grins states, the Christian vision of humankind in turn as created in God's image. The divine design is that we mirror within creation what God is like in God's own eternal reality. The Christian vision of God as the social Trinity and our creation to be the Imago Dei provides a transcendent basis for the human ethical ideas, life, and community. In speaking of the mirroring of the divine relations, Grins strikes a similar chord as Fittis' imitation of the Trinity. However, only an incomplete reading of Grins would suggest that this is all with which he is concerned. Grins also speaks plainly of participation in the divine triune life. He says, the Father sent the Son in order to realize God's eternal design to draw humankind to participate in his own life. He further notes that such participation in the divine life is not a matter of mere economic external imitation, which only involves ethical improvement, and that it involves more than a common shared experience or narrative. He says, the fellowship we share with each other is not merely that of a common experience or common narrative, but it is nothing less than our common participation in the divine communion between the Father and the Son, mediated by the Holy Spirit. Thus, I believe that we can see present within Grins the themes of an imitation of God, as well as the participation in God that Fittis desires. My suggestion then is that for people made in the Imago Dei, a Trinitarian understanding of God helps one to understand their participation in not only the Missio Dei in the world, but also one's participation